Dead America, Tales from Las Vegas, The Radio Station by Derek Slayton. Chapter 1. Captain Foster led Sergeant Hansen, Private Parker, and Private Thomas out of the hardware store, stepping over the bodies of the dead in the parking lot. Blood pooled in the cracks of the asphalt, darkening in the heat. The foursome walked towards an SUV sitting 30 yards away, their boots crunching on broken glass and spent shell casings. As they went, Foster and Hansen glanced back over their shoulders, spotting one of the gladiators that came to their aid, standing in the doorway of the hardware store, seeing them off. Magnus stood with his warhammer resting on his shoulder, his silhouette framed by the darkness of the store's interior. Both men struggled to find the words to describe their surreal experience. Foster opened his mouth to speak, trying to articulate what had just happened, but nothing came out. Hansen did the same, his jaw working soundlessly before he shook his head and gave up. All four men carried heavy canvas bags of food on their backs, the straps digging into their shoulders. The weight was considerable, maybe 40 pounds each. In addition to the supplies, they carried their hunting shotguns and other gear, making each step deliberate and measured. The sun beat down on them, sweat already forming on their brows. As they approached the vehicle, Parker pulled a set of keys from his pocket, extending his arm towards the SUV. The key fob looked small in his hand, almost comically so. He held it up like a magic talisman, hope written across his features. "Come on, one time, just work for me," Parker said. He hit the unlock button on the fob, his thumb pressing down hard. For a moment, nothing happened, and Foster saw Parker's shoulders start to slump. Then the relieved thunking sound came from the SUV, joined by the headlights flashing for a moment. "Hell yeah, now we're in business," Parker said. His voice carried genuine excitement, the kind that came from small victories in impossible situations. Thomas looked over at him, adjusting the canvas bag on his back. "Where the hell did you find those things anyway?" Thomas asked. Parker grinned, proud of his resourcefulness. He gestured back toward the hardware store with his free hand. "I saw one poor bastard in a store vest, so I figured I would check his pockets. The keys were in there, and this is a bit of a hike to the store, so I figured employee parking," Parker explained. Hansen nodded appreciatively, recognizing good work. The sergeant had been hard on Parker over the last few days, pushing him to think ahead, to plan better. It was good to see it paying off. "Not bad, Parker." "Not bad at all," Hansen said. Parker's grin widened, his chest puffing up slightly at the praise. Thomas rolled his eyes at the display, but said nothing. "I appreciate that, Sarge," Parker said. Hansen's expression shifted, becoming more businesslike. He gestured toward Foster with his thumb. "Now toss those keys over to the cap so we can get going," Hansen said. Parker's pride faded a bit, his shoulders dropping. His eyes lingered on the SUV, clearly imagining himself behind the wheel. He'd been hoping he would get to drive, maybe prove himself a little more, but orders were orders. He tossed the keys over in a gentle arc, Foster catching them one-handed. Parker gave the SUV a look, nodding his head at the sight. "Well, at least this one is big enough that I don't have to sit in the trunk," Parker said. Thomas patted him on the shoulder as they piled into the SUV, shutting the doors and getting secure. The interior smelled stale, like hot plastic and old air freshener. Foster slid the key into the ignition, turning it as everyone buckled in. He let it idle for a moment, the engine whining after sitting for several days. The sound was rough, catching and stuttering before smoothing out. Foster gave it some gas, warming it up. The dashboard lights flickered on, showing a quarter tank of fuel. Not great, but enough. "Hansen, do you have directions for me?" Foster asked. It took a moment for the sergeant to get the directions pulled up. He tapped at his phone screen, waiting for the GPS to load. The signal was spotty at best, but Mike had sent them the map earlier as a backup. "Looks like it's a pretty straight shot. Hang a left out of here and straight on for a couple of miles," Hansen said. Foster nodded, his hands finding their grip on the steering wheel. The leather was worn smooth, comfortable. "Sounds easy enough," Foster said. He put the vehicle into gear, hitting the gas and peeling out from the parking space. The tires kicked up loose gravel and debris as they accelerated. In a flash, he made the turn onto the highway, weaving around a couple of zombies that were shambling along. The creatures barely had time to react before the SUV was past them. their dead eyes tracking the movement. One of them reached out with gnarled fingers, but they were already gone. The captain kept the speed manageable, maybe 40 miles per hour, fast enough to make progress, slow enough to react if needed. The road ahead was clear for a few blocks, abandoned cars scattered on either side, but nothing blocking their path. Then Foster saw the pileup ahead, cars twisted together in a mess of metal and broken glass. He cursed under his breath and hung a hard right, forced to drive through the parking lot of a store to go around. The men looked over to the cars as they passed, spotting a couple of creatures strapped into the driver's seat. Their bodies were slumped forward against the steering wheels, seatbelts holding them in place. One of them was a woman in a business suit, her face pressed against the side window. There were other ghouls in the back seat of another car, a family of 4 that never made it home. The drivers taken out by their family or friends who turned unexpectedly. "No matter how many times I see that, it doesn't get any easier," Thomas said. His voice was quiet, subdued. He stared at the trapped zombies as they drove past, his jaw tight. Hansen turned in his seat to look at the private, his expression sympathetic but firm. "Try not to think about it, Thomas," Hansen said. Thomas let out a scoff, his head shaking. The advice was well-meaning, but useless. He spoke in a somewhat mocking manner, unable to help himself. "Oh, thanks, Sarge. That makes it all better," Thomas said. Hansen let out a chuckle before continuing, his tone shifting to something more serious. He'd been through enough tours to know what Thomas was feeling, had felt it himself plenty of times. "Yeah, I know, Thomas. It's easier said than done. But it's just like over in the sandbox, you can't focus on all the suffering happening around you. All you can focus on is what's in front of you. That's how you survive," Hansen explained. Thomas thought about it for a moment, his eyes still fixed on the cars they were leaving behind. He wanted to respond, wanted to argue that this was different somehow. But instead, he just shook it off, turning to face forward again. He knew that Hansen was right, even if he hated admitting it. There was no time for grief, no space for it. But he still couldn't help feeling sorry for the people losing their lives in such a horrific manner. "Sarge, we're going to need another route," Foster said. The captain slowed down, nearly to a stop as he pointed ahead down the street. His voice carried warning, tension creeping in. 3 blocks up was an impenetrable wall of ghouls blocking the way. There had to be at least 100 of them, maybe more. They were packed together, shoulder to shoulder, filling the entire width of the road. It was difficult to see what was holding their attention, but Foster could hear something. A car alarm, maybe, or someone's last stand. It was ultimately a moot point as they didn't have the firepower to do anything about it. "Hang a right here and go up a few blocks. I'll see what I can find in the meantime," Hansen said. The sergeant bent his head down, studying a map on the GPS on their phone. His finger traced along side streets, looking for alternatives. Foster hit the gas, picking up speed before making the turn onto the next street. The wheels squealed slightly as they took the corner. The men in the vehicle were tossed to the left, as the captain cut the wheel hard to the right while yelling out. The SUV bounced up and down violently as they struck something, the entire frame shuddering from the impact. Rather than continuing to roll on, a horrific grinding sound came from the front of the vehicle. Metal screeched against metal, wrong and terrible. Foster's eyes went wide as he felt the steering pull hard to one side, forcing him to slam on brakes. "What the hell was that?" Parker asked. His voice was sharp, alarmed. Everyone was thrown forward against their seatbelts, the canvas bags sliding forward and pressing against their backs. Foster looked down at the dashboard, seeing warning lights flash on. "I ran over one of those things," Foster said. He slammed on the gas, trying to push forward. The engine roared in response, the RPMs climbing. But something was wrong. Zombies began descending on them from all sides, emerging from between buildings and out of storefronts. It was only 10 of them, but they were within 10 yards and closing. The creatures moved with purpose, their arms outstretched. Despite the engine whining, the vehicle wasn't moving. The tires spun uselessly, smoke starting to rise from the wheel well. Foster looked at the zombies bearing down on them, their faces slack and dead. They had maybe 10 seconds before the first one reached the vehicle. He realized that they needed to act, that sitting here would get them killed. "Clear them out," Foster ordered. The captain threw the SUV into park as all 4 men darted from the vehicle, weapons raised. Their movements were sharp and coordinated, doors flying open in unison. In a matter of seconds, all of them opened fire with their hunting shotguns. The blasts were deafening in the street, echoing off the buildings. Each shot found its target, shells tearing through rotted flesh and shattering skulls. The creatures dropped one after another, their bodies crumpling to the pavement. Within 15 seconds, the threat was ended, but the noise they'd created was enormous. The sound of gunfire rolled through the streets, announcing their presence to everything in a 3-block radius. "Cap, what the hell is going on?" Thomas asked. His voice was tight, controlled. His shotgun was still raised, scanning for new threats. Foster ejected the spent shells from his weapon, loading fresh ones with ease. "Just keep watch on our 6, Foster said. Thomas nodded as he and Parker did as instructed, sweeping their rear flank. They positioned themselves back to back with Foster and Hansen, creating a defensive perimeter around the SUV. Both privates watched for creatures to emerge from between buildings, which they knew was only a matter of time, given how much noise they just made. Foster and Hansen walked over to the front end of the SUV, muttering curses under their breath as they saw the damage. The scene was worse than they'd thought. A zombie's body was wedged under the vehicle, but that wasn't the main problem. "I'm not a mechanic, but that looks pretty well screwed to me," Hansen said. The mangled body of a zombie was caught up in the wheel well, limbs twisted at angles that defied nature. But more concerning was the tire itself. Punctured and hanging off the rim at an angle, the rubber was shredded, exposing the metal beneath. Something sharp had torn through it completely. The two of them inspected it, shaking their heads. There was no quick fix for this, no way to patch it and keep going. "I don't suppose there's a spare in the back, is there?" Foster asked. "Cap, we got problems," Parker called out. His voice carried urgency, drawing everyone's attention. Foster and Hansen looked to the rear, seeing what the privates were seeing. Dozens of zombies were coming out from behind buildings and from the side streets. They emerged in ones and twos at first, then in larger groups. There had to be 40 or 50 of them already, with more appearing every second. They were a significant distance away, maybe 200 yards, and no runners among them. The ghouls moved with the slow, shambling gait of creatures that had been turned for days. So, the soldiers had some time, but not much. "Damn it, okay, we're gonna have to go on foot," Foster said. "I haven't found us a way to the station yet," Hansen said. "We know it's in that general direction, and we're sure as hell not going to be going the way we came. We got one option, so let's get to it," Foster said. Hansen reluctantly nodded, understanding the logic even if he didn't like it. He started barking out orders, his voice cutting through the groans of the approaching zombies. "Parker, Thomas, you heard the captain. Let's get the food out of the back and start moving." Chapter 2. The four soldiers moved as quickly as they could down the street, weighed down by the heavy bags of food on their backs. Each step was deliberate, the canvas straps cutting into their shoulders as they hustled forward. Foster led the way, his head on a swivel as he scanned for threats. They got a block up from the wrecked SUV, leaving the disabled vehicle behind. The sounds of moans continued to grow behind them, an acoustic wave of death rolling through the streets. At the next intersection, Foster slowed his pace and looked to the left in the direction of the radio station. His jaw tightened at what he saw. The view opened up to reveal a neighborhood filled with zombies stretching several blocks deep. The creatures were spread out across lawns and driveways, wandering between houses with no apparent purpose. But there were dozens of them, maybe more. Too many to fight through. Too many to avoid. He hesitated for a moment, his mind racing through options. Then he looked in the direction they had been running, spotting nothing but a collection of small shops lining the road. A pizza place, a dry cleaner, a nail salon. Zombies were beginning to emerge into the streets from the buildings, drawn by the noise of their earlier gunfire. "What are we doing, Cap?" Parker asked. His voice carried urgency but not panic. The private was breathing hard from the run, sweat rolling down his face. Foster muttered under his breath before speaking up, making the call. "Let's get into the neighborhood. Find a house that looks empty and get to it," Foster said. The men nodded as they followed Foster into the neighborhood, turning left and committing to the route. The residential street was lined with single-story homes, most of them with small front yards. The captain slung the hunting shotgun over his shoulder, the weight settling against his back alongside the food bag. He pulled out a knife from his belt, the blade catching the sunlight. A zombie shambled in front of them, its vacant eyes tracking their movement. Foster made a beeline towards it, closing the distance in 3 long strides. With a forceful jab, he drove the blade through the creature's eye socket, taking it down with a head strike. The ghoul dropped without a sound, crumpling to the pavement. The soldiers continued running for a block, their boots pounding against the asphalt. Each man used their knives to put down zombies as they went, working in practiced silence. Thomas caught one from behind, grabbing it by the shoulder and driving his blade through the base of its skull. Hansen took out another with a side strike, the knife entering through the temple. They were not wanting to use the guns for fear the noise would draw more attention, having learned that lesson the hard way. As they reached the next intersection, the situation was deteriorating. The zombies in the street ahead of them were beginning to converge in the middle of the road, forming a growing cluster that blocked their path. The side streets were looking just as congested with ghouls, maybe 30 or 40 visible in either direction. Parker looked to one of the houses just up from them, his eyes locking onto a single-story home with beige siding. The driveway had a sedan, the front door closed. More importantly, the backyard had a fence. He pointed to it excitedly, his finger stabbing the air. "Get to the backyard of that house," Parker called out. Parker spoke with enough conviction that the other soldiers fell into line behind him without thinking or arguing. There was something in his tone, a certainty that suggested he had a plan. The 4 of them ran through the front yard, their boots crushing overgrown grass as they kept their distance from the encroaching horde. The zombies were closing in from multiple directions now, maybe 20 yards away on all sides. Parker reached the fence first, his hands finding the top of the waist-high chain-link fence. He vaulted over it in one smooth motion, his combat boots hitting the ground on the other side. Then he turned and reached back, helping the others over it. Foster came next, then Thomas, then Hansen. The sergeant's food bag caught on the fence top for a moment, but he yanked it free. As they got inside the enclosure, they checked to make sure that the gate was closed. The latch was secure, rust visible on the metal, but still functional. The men looked to Parker, waiting for him to explain. "Well, now what, Parker?" Hansen asked. The private smirked, an expression that immediately made Thomas nervous. Parker pulled out his shotgun with deliberate slowness, chambering a round with a metallic click. Then he raised the barrel toward the sky and fired a single round into the air. The blast was deafening, echoing off the houses. It drew confused and agitated looks from the other soldiers, their expressions shifting from surprise to anger. "What the hell is wrong with you, Parker?" Thomas demanded. His voice was sharp, almost shouting. Every zombie in a 3-block radius would have heard that. Thomas looked around wildly, expecting the horde to come crashing down on them any second. Parker's smirk widened into a smile. "Trust me, Thomas," Parker said. Parker ignored the men as he walked up to the back door of the house, his shotgun back over his shoulder. The rear of the home had a sliding glass door, the kind common in desert homes. He cupped his hands around his face and looked through the glass to see the inside. The view showed signs of carnage that made his stomach turn. The kitchen table and chairs were overturned, one chair broken into pieces. Blood was splattered on the wall in arterial spray patterns and pooling on the floor in dark patches. Whoever lived here had died badly. Parker pulled out his knife again, positioning the blade against the lock of the sliding glass door. He jimmied it around for a moment, working the mechanism until he felt it give. The lock popped with a soft click. He threw the door open, the heavy glass slamming against the frame and sending a loud sound throughout the house. The noise reverberated through the empty rooms, announcing their presence to anything inside. A moment later, excited moans came from within. They were close, maybe one room away. A few seconds after that, 3 zombies emerged from a hallway. The entire family stumbled into view. Mother, father, and son shambled towards the private, their movements uncoordinated and jerky. The parents were covered in bites, their clothes torn and stained with dried blood. Deep wounds marked their arms and necks, the flesh ragged. The teenage son only had blood on the front of his shirt, no visible bites. His face was slack, eyes vacant. Clearly the kid had changed first, turning and killing his parents in the early hours of the apocalypse. Parker casually stepped forward, his knife already in motion. He drove the blade into the head of the father, punching through the forehead with enough force to drop the creature. Then he shoved the corpse backward into the others, using the dead weight as a weapon. The body crashed into the mother and son, causing them to stumble and lose their footing. Parker made quick work of both of them while they were off balance, his knife finding their skulls with efficient strikes. The shamblers posed little threat to him, too slow and clumsy to mount any real defense. The private stepped back, wiping his blade on the father's shirt before sheathing it. He turned back to the others, expecting praise, or at least acknowledgement. But his teammates were focused on the backyard, their attention drawn to the fence. The horde of zombies was beginning to converge around the chain-link barrier, drawn by the gunshot. They pressed against the metal, their hands reaching through the gaps. There were already 15 or 20 of them, with more arriving every few seconds. "Well, Parker, you got us into one hell of a mess. I hope you got a plan," Hansen said. The sergeant's voice carried an edge, frustration mixed with concern. The fence was only 4 feet high, not enough to hold back a determined crowd, and the creatures were stacking up fast, their combined weight starting to bow the metal inward. "Trust me, Sarge," Parker said. There was that confidence again, unwavering despite the circumstances. Parker turned and walked through the house, his boots tracking blood across the tile floor. He left the others by the back door as the zombie mob continued to grow around them. The moaning grew louder, a chorus of dead voices that set teeth on edge. Foster watched him go, his hand resting on his knife handle. After a few moments that felt like an eternity, Parker stepped back into the kitchen, his expression unchanged. "Thomas, do me a favor. Walk to the back of the lot and squeeze off one more shot with your shotgun. Then join us in the front room," Parker said. Thomas was confused, his brow furrowing. He looked at Parker like the man had lost his mind. The order made no sense, would only make things worse. He was unsure if he should obey the order given by his equal, given by another private with no authority over him. He looked over to Foster, silently asking for guidance. The captain let out a chuckle, a sound that seemed out of place given their situation. But there was understanding in his eyes, recognition of what Parker was doing. "Do it, Thomas, and make sure you shut this door quietly when you come back in," Foster said. Thomas nodded slowly, still uncertain but willing to trust his captain's judgment. He walked towards the rear of the fenced-in area, stepping carefully around the overturned patio furniture. The zombies pressed harder against the fence, their fingers grasping at empty air. Some of them were inches from Thomas, separated only by the chain link. He readied his shotgun, pointing the barrel at the head of one of the dozens of creatures pressed up against the back of the fence. The zombie's face was rotted, its jaw hanging at an odd angle. Thomas squeezed the trigger, and the creature's head vanished like a ghoulish magic trick, there one moment and gone the next. Brain matter and skull fragments sprayed across the neighbor's yard. "I hope you know what you're doing, Parker," Thomas muttered. He slung the rifle over his shoulder before walking back to the house, moving quickly now. The zombies were agitated, their moaning reaching a fever pitch. Thomas reached the sliding door and gently pulled it shut behind him, the glass meeting the frame with barely a whisper. As he entered and moved through the hallway, stepping over the bodies of the family, he reached the front room of the house. He noticed the 3 others relaxing on the sofa and chairs, sitting like they were waiting for a TV show to start. Parker had his feet up on the coffee table, looking pleased with himself. "I guess I should take comfort in the fact that none of you are concerned that we're surrounded," Thomas said. His voice was dry, sarcastic. He looked at each of them in turn, trying to understand what he was missing. Hansen smiled, enjoying the moment. "Who said we're surrounded?" Hansen asked. Thomas was confused as the Sarge motioned with his hand toward the front windows. The gesture was casual, almost lazy. The private did as requested, stepping over to the window and pulling back the curtain. Sunlight streamed in, making him squint. He looked out to the street and his eyes widened. There were only a handful of zombies in the street and front yard, maybe 5 or 6 total, all of whom were shambling towards the rear of the house, following the sound. They were drawn by the chorus of moans coming from the pack in the back, pulled like magnets toward the commotion. The front was essentially clear, the path to the street wide open. "All right, credit where credit is due. Nice job, Parker. The question is, now what?" Thomas asked. He turned away from the window, looking at his teammates with new respect. Parker had pulled off something clever, using the zombies' own behavior against them. Foster stood up from the sofa, stretching his back. The food bag sat at his feet, ready to be picked up again. "There's a car in the driveway. We're going to find some keys and hit the road again," Foster said. His tone was matter of fact, like this was the most obvious thing in the world. Thomas looked around the living room, his eyes scanning the walls and surfaces. He spotted a set of keys hanging on a hook by the front door, next to a coat rack. The hook had a little wooden sign above it that read, "Home Sweet Home," in cursive letters. He stepped over, grabbing the keys and tossing them across the room to Hansen in an easy arc. "What are you giving these to me for?" Hansen asked. He caught them one-handed, looking at Thomas with a raised eyebrow. The sergeant held the keys up, the metal jangling. Thomas grinned, unable to resist the opportunity. "Thought you might be a safer driver than the captain there," Thomas said. He gave Foster a playful wink, his expression innocent. The comment hung in the air for a moment, before everyone broke into a bit of laughter. Even Foster chuckled, shaking his head at the jab. The tension from the last 20 minutes released in that shared moment. "Yeah, fair enough, Thomas, but I got that wreck out of my system, so I'm good to go," Foster said. He motioned for the keys with an outstretched hand, a small smile still on his face. Hansen tossed them over in a gentle underhand throw. Foster caught them and slipped them into his pocket. Then he walked to the window, pulling the curtain back slightly to check the street again. The handful of zombies were still moving toward the back, paying no attention to the front. But that could change quickly. "We're giving those things a couple more minutes, then we're headed out." Chapter 3. Several minutes passed as the soldiers waited for the zombies to wander around to the back of the house. Foster stood by the window, occasionally pulling the curtain aside to check the progress. The creatures moved with agonizing slowness, their shuffling steps taking forever to clear the front yard. Despite their patience, a couple of ghouls remained at the front of the house, lingering near the driveway. One of them was caught on something, its foot tangled in a garden hose. The other just stood there swaying, seemingly stuck in place. "Parker, Thomas, if you do the honors, I'll pop the trunk for the bags," Foster said. The two privates nodded, shifting into action mode. Their hands found their knife handles, pulling the blades free with practiced ease. Hansen moved to the front door, his fingers wrapping around the knob. He opened it slowly, allowing the hinges to swing without sound. Parker and Thomas darted out first, their movements quick but controlled. Parker and Thomas had their knives in their hands, each man picking a target and strolling over to it without a sense of urgency. There was no need to rush with only 2 targets. Parker headed for the one tangled in the hose, while Thomas took the free-roaming ghoul near the mailbox. The ghouls took notice of the presence of the men, their heads turning with jerky movements. They turned just in time to receive strikes from the soldiers' blades. Parker drove his knife through the temple of his target, twisting as he pulled it free. Thomas went for an overhead strike, the blade punching through the crown of his zombie's skull. Once they heard the trunk of the sedan pop open with a metallic click, they retreated back to it. Within moments, everyone was in the car, doors shutting in quick succession. Foster slid into the driver's seat, the keys already in his hand. He started the engine up, the sedan coming to life with a smooth purr. Much better than the SUV had sounded. He threw it into gear and pulled out, the tires rolling smoothly over the driveway and onto the street. As they drove away from the house, the soldiers looked back over their shoulders. They spotted a handful of zombies shambling out from the back of the house, emerging around the corners. The creatures moaned in frustration as the fresh meat they had been pursuing drove off, their arms outstretched toward the departing vehicle. "Well, that was a fun little detour," Thomas said. His voice was light, almost joking. The tension from earlier had faded, replaced by the relief of being mobile again. Foster kept his eyes on the road ahead, navigating around an abandoned bicycle in the street. "Where am I going, Hansen?" Foster asked. The sergeant studied the map for a few more moments, his finger tracing their route on the phone screen. He zoomed in and out, getting his bearings and confirming landmarks. "About 6 more blocks should do it. Just look for a clear side street to get back to the main road," Hansen said. Foster nodded as he continued driving them down the quiet neighborhood street. The houses on either side were modest, single-story affairs with small yards. Some had cars in the driveways, others were empty. There was a smattering of zombies visible, maybe one or two per block, but nothing like the mob they left behind at the house, nothing that posed a real threat. The reduction in zombie numbers continued on the side streets as well. The creatures spread thin across the area. It gave them hope that maybe the worst was behind them. It didn't last long. Foster stopped at the next intersection, his foot finding the brake pedal. He muttered to himself under his breath, curses that the others couldn't quite make out. Parker leaned forward from the back seat, craning his neck to see what had caused the captain to stop. "Let me guess, that's the station?" Parker asked. His tone suggested he already knew the answer. Hansen let out a long breath, confirming what they all feared. "Yeah, boys, I'm afraid so," Hansen said. The radio station sat in a small brick building on the other side of the main road, maybe 100 yards away. The structure was squat and plain, industrial-looking. A single door marked the front entrance, painted red and standing out against the brown brick. 50 creatures swarmed around that lone door, packed together in a dense cluster. They pushed and jostled against each other, hands slapping at the metal surface. The moaning was audible even from this distance, a low rumble of dead voices. "Hansen, let me see the phone," Foster said. His voice was calm, already shifting to the problem-solving mode. Foster took the device from the sergeant, his thumb scrolling through the recent calls. He found Mike's number and tapped it, bringing the phone to his ear. It rang once before connecting. "You got Midnight Mike," came the cheerful greeting. "It's Foster. Are you off the air?" Foster asked. "Yeah, I'm taking a snack break, hoping you boys are getting close," Mike said. There was anticipation in his voice, the hope of someone who'd been alone too long. Foster looked at the mob surrounding the building, counting heads. "Oh, we're close." "We can see your building as a matter of fact," Foster said. Mike's response came quickly, relief evident. "That is music to my ears, Captain. I can let you in the front door once you take out those zombies out front," Mike said. Foster's jaw tightened, his free hand gripping the steering wheel. He chose his words carefully, trying not to sound accusatory. "Yeah, about that. It would have been nice to know there was 50 of those things out there," Foster said. Mike fell silent for a long beat. The pause stretched out, uncomfortable and telling. When he spoke again, his voice had lost some of its energy. "There's how many out there?" Mike asked. He sounded genuinely shocked, confused by the number. Foster looked at the mob again, doing a quick count. If anything, he'd underestimated. 50, Mike, maybe 60, Foster confirmed. "I had no idea," Mike said. Now Foster was confused. How could Mike not know about a crowd that size surrounding his building? The DJ had been holed up there for days. Surely he'd noticed. "How in the world did you have no idea, Mike?" Foster asked. There was no anger in his tone, just curiosity. Mike's explanation came quickly, defensive but reasonable. "Look closer at the building, Captain. Do you see a window? Because I don't. All I knew was that there were a few of them banging on the door, and I sure as hell wasn't going to answer it, you know," Mike explained. Foster leaned forward in his seat, squinting at the structure. He scanned the brick walls, looking for glass. Mike was right. There wasn't a single window visible, at least not on this side. The building was a brick box with a door, built like a bunker. His tone softened, understanding the situation better now. "It's all good, Mike. We'll figure it out," Foster said. He heard Mike let out a breath on the other end, grateful for the understanding. The DJ's next question came quickly. "Just tell me what you need from me," Mike asked. Foster contemplated for a moment, staring at the station. His eyes swept the scene, taking in the parking lot, the street, the layout. He was trying to get inspiration, looking for an angle they could exploit. Finally, it hit him when he spotted an SUV sitting in the parking lot, maybe 20 feet from the door. The vehicle was newer looking, dark blue with tinted windows. "Mike, is that your SUV in the lot?" Foster asked. "Yep, sure is. Fully loaded, 4-wheel drive, and all yours if you need it," Mike said. There was enthusiasm in his voice now, eager to help however he could. Foster felt a plan coming together in his mind, the pieces falling into place. "Good deal. You're probably going to hear some gunfire in the near future. Just be at that door ready to let us in," Foster said. Mike's response was immediate, committed. "I'm headed there right now, Foster." "I'll see you boys in just a minute," Mike said. Foster clicked the phone off, his thumb finding the end call button. He tossed it back over to the sergeant in an easy arc. Hansen caught it one-handed, then looked at his captain in a confused manner. His expression suggested he was missing something. "Did you grow wings in the last few minutes, Cap?" "Because you're acting like we don't have a big obstacle in our way over there," Hansen said. Foster smirked, enjoying the moment. He reached down to the keys hanging in the ignition, his fingers wrapping around the key fob. He held it up so Hansen could see, then tapped on the bright red button on it. The panic button stood out against the black plastic, just waiting to be pressed. When activated, it would set off the car alarm. "Well, that explains why you were asking about his ride," Hansen said. Understanding dawned on his face, a slight smile forming. Thomas spoke up from the back seat, his voice carrying frustration. "We can't see shit back here, so do you guys mind filling us in?" Thomas asked. He and Parker were craning their necks, trying to get a view of what the others were seeing. Hansen turned in his seat to address them. "Foster is going to park us somewhere and hit the car alarm," Hansen explained. He paused for effect, letting them process that first part. "Then we just have to hope that the only zombies that hear it are the ones at the radio station," Hansen continued. The rest of the car broke into a bit of laughter, the sound mixing nervousness with amusement. Foster pulled the car away from the intersection, taking a right turn. He drove down the main road for a block, scanning the buildings. He found what he was looking for and pulled the car into the back of a store, a small strip mall location with a rear parking area. The engine shut off and he popped the trunk with a pull of the lever. The men got out in unison, their doors opening and closing in a staggered rhythm. They grabbed the bags from the trunk, the canvas material heavy in their hands. Weapons were checked and readied, safeties clicked off. Foster walked over to the back door of the small shop, his hand finding the handle. He tried it to see if it was open, giving it a firm turn and pull. However, it was locked, the door refusing to budge. He contemplated for a few moments, weighing options. Then he shrugged and raised his shotgun, the barrel coming up smooth. He fired a single shell through the locking mechanism, the blast echoing off the buildings. The metal around the lock shattered, pieces flying. The sound startled the other men, who jerked at the unexpected gunfire. "What?" "We're about to hit the alarm anyway," Foster said. His logic was sound even if his methods were abrupt. Hansen shook his head, a bemused expression on his face. He moved past Foster, shouldering through the damaged door. It swung inward, revealing a dark interior. Hansen darted into the store with his weapon at the ready, his finger resting alongside the trigger guard. It was a small pastry shop, the kind that made custom cakes. Display cases lined one wall, a counter with a register on the other. The back area had ovens and mixing equipment. It made for a quick sweep, only 3 rooms to clear. "We're clear," Hansen called out. The 2 privates got inside the store quickly, moving through the doorway with their bags. Foster followed, pulling the door shut behind them as best he could. The damaged frame didn't want to close properly, sitting crooked in the jam. He looked around the small kitchen area for a few moments, his eyes scanning the stainless steel surfaces. Then he spotted a long metal spoon, the kind used for industrial mixing. He grabbed it and wedged it into the gap between the door and frame, jamming it in tight. The makeshift lock wouldn't stop anything determined, but it might slow something down. "That's not going to hold for long, but it doesn't need to," Foster said. He pulled out the keys, turning them over in his hand until the fob was facing up. His thumb hovered over the alarm button, the red surface smooth under his fingertip. "How are we looking in there, Hansen?" Foster called out. The sergeant had moved to the front of the shop, positioning himself near the windows. He was crouched low, using the display cases for cover, while maintaining line of sight to the street. "We're out of sight, but can see the station," Hansen reported. His voice carried back through the small space. Foster took a breath, preparing himself. This was the moment of truth. "Okay, here goes nothing," Foster said. He pressed the button down, feeling it click under his thumb. For a second, nothing happened. Then the car alarm began to blare, the sound cutting through the air. The horn honked in a rhythmic pattern, joined by the high-pitched wail of the siren. It was loud, obnoxiously so, exactly what they needed. It took a few moments for the sound to reach the back of the mob at the radio station. Foster watched through the broken back door, waiting. Then he saw movement. The creatures at the rear of the pack began to break away from the radio station, their heads turning toward the new stimulus. They shambled towards the source of the noise, following the sound like moths to a flame. More followed, then more. The mob began to thin as zombies peeled off in groups. "I think we're in business, Cap." Chapter 4. Foster moved up to the front of the store, his boots padding quietly across the tile floor. He took a knee behind the counter beside Hansen, lowering himself into position. The two of them peeked over the top towards the large front windows, their eyes scanning the street beyond. Across the street, they could see about a third of the zombies in front of the radio station, beginning to peel off from the pack. The creatures shambled away from the door, drawn by the insistent wail of the car alarm. They headed in the direction of the pastry shop, following the sound with single-minded focus. "We're going to need more of them to move if we're going to make it in there," Hansen said. His voice was low, barely above a whisper. The sergeant's assessment was accurate. There were still too many bodies crowding that door, maybe 30 or 40 ghouls still pressed against the entrance. They'd never make it through that many. "Just give it time, Sergeant. Just give it time," Foster said. His tone was patient, measured. The captain had learned over the years that rushing usually made things worse. Better to wait, to let the situation develop. The car alarm continued to blare, sending the shrill noise out into the streets. The sound bounced off buildings, creating an echo that made it hard to pinpoint the exact location. But the zombies didn't care about precision. They just followed the general direction, stumbling toward the source. The men sat behind cover, occasionally peeking out to see the progress. Foster counted heads, watching the crowd thin. Parker checked his knife, making sure the blade was clean. Thomas adjusted his food bag straps, redistributing the weight. Much to their delight, about 2/3 of the mob had taken the bait and was moving down the street. Some of them disappeared around the building to the back, following the alarm. Others were still in view, but getting farther away with each passing second. "Shouldn't be long now. Everybody get ready to move on my signal," Foster said. The men nodded as they secured the bags on their backs, pulling straps tight and making sure nothing would shift during the sprint. Foster looked at each of them in turn, making sure they understood the next part. "And we kill quietly. We still need to get out of the building and to Mike's car," Foster added. The reminder was necessary. It would be easy to panic and start blasting away with the shotguns, but that would bring every zombie in earshot down on them. The men again nodded, understanding the stakes. Most of them ducked back behind cover, keeping low and out of sight. Parker kept his eyes just above the counter, keeping a close watch on the situation. His gaze swept left to right, monitoring the street and the thinning crowd at the radio station. A full minute passed in tense silence. The only sound was the distant car alarm and the muffled moaning of zombies. Then Parker spotted something unexpected, his body going rigid. A lone zombie shambled out from the left side of the store, appearing on the sidewalk just in front of the building. The creature moved past their position, heading toward the alarm. It took 2 steps before another one followed close behind, emerging from the same direction. By the time the third one emerged, Parker was to his feet, vaulting over the counter in one fluid motion. "Parker, what the hell are you doing?" Foster demanded. His voice was sharp, but still kept to a loud whisper. Parker's sudden movement could give away their position. The private landed on the other side of the counter, his boots hitting the floor hard. "We're in trouble, Cap," Parker said. Foster and Hansen poked their heads over the counter, seeing the zombies just on the other side of the glass. 3 had become 5, all of them shuffling past the storefront. Parker rushed up to the window, staying against the wall to minimize his exposure. He pressed his back flat against the surface, hoping that the zombies outside didn't spot him through the glass. His breathing was quick, controlled. Parker took a knee by the window, his body still tight against the wall. He leaned his head forward slightly, looking to the left of the store. His mouth fell open at the sight, eyes going wide. "Cap, we have to move right now," Parker called out. Foster could hear the panic in the private's voice, an emotion he rarely heard from the young soldier. The urgency in those words was enough to override any questions. It prompted him to move without hesitation. He rushed up to the front as Parker moved to the door, his hand finding the handle. The private was ready to open it the second they got the order. As Hansen and Thomas saw that everyone was converging on the exit, They got moving too. Even though they didn't know what the specific threat was, they trusted their teammates' judgment. Foster got to the window, pressing himself against the wall beside Parker. He looked to the left and felt his stomach drop. Another 40 creatures were shambling down the street, drawn to the noise. Maybe more. It was a second wave, zombies that had been farther away, but were now converging on the alarm. They were spread across the entire width of the road, a wall of dead flesh moving their direction. "We have to go right now," Foster ordered. He pulled his knife out, the blade catching the light from the window. Foster shook his head as Thomas and Hansen began to ready their shotguns, their hands moving to unsling the weapons from their shoulders. "We still have to move quietly," Foster said. The two soldiers looked out of the window, peering around the counter. They noticed a couple of the creatures that had been wandering by were now pressed up against the glass, drawn to the movement inside. Their hands slapped at the window, leaving smears. More were turning toward the shop. Reluctantly, Hansen and Thomas slung the weapons back over their shoulders and pulled out their knives. The blades would have to do. "Push to the radio station," Foster commanded. Parker pulled open the door, throwing it wide. Foster was the first one through, moving like a linebacker. He lowered his shoulder, building momentum in 2 quick steps. He plowed into the side of a zombie just on the other side of the entrance, catching it off guard. The creature ragdolled, its body flying sideways into the street. It landed hard on the pavement with a wet smack, arms and legs splaying out. Hansen was the next through the door, his boots hitting the sidewalk at a run. He stepped to the left and delivered a kill strike to a surprised zombie that didn't have any time to react. The blade entered through the temple, dropping the ghoul instantly. The sergeant shoved the body back with his free hand, pushing it into the path of several others approaching from that direction. The corpse tripped them up, creating a tangle of limbs. Thomas and Parker were next out the door, not even breaking stride. They pumped their legs hard towards the radio station, running right by the captain. Foster was busy dispatching another creature, his knife working in quick, efficient strikes. The zombie dropped and Foster was already turning, scanning for the next threat. The duo raced across the street, their footfalls on the pavement loud in the morning air. The sound drew the attention of a handful of creatures that had been headed towards the car alarm. The zombies' heads swiveled, their vacant eyes locking onto the running soldiers. They changed direction, angling to intercept. "Forget them! Clear the way to the door!" Parker shouted. Thomas nodded as Parker raced up to a creature blocking their path. The ghoul's arms were outstretched, ready to grab. Rather than go for a kill shot that would slow him down, Parker twisted his body as he got close. He used the weight of the food bags on his back like a weapon, swinging his torso around. The heavy canvas slammed into the ghoul's chest, knocking it to the ground. The creature hit the pavement hard, rolling. Parker spun completely around from the momentum, his arms windmilling for balance. He managed to stay on his feet and keep moving forward, not losing a step. He darted to the next creature in his path, this one closer to the radio station entrance. His knife came up in a smooth arc, driving into its forehead. The blade punched through bone, and the zombie crumpled. As that body fell to the ground, it revealed the real problem. Nearly a dozen creatures were standing between them and the radio station entrance. The ghouls were tightly packed together, all of them pressed against the door. Only a couple of the ghouls were facing the duo, their attention drawn by the running footsteps. It gave Parker and Thomas a chance to act before the whole group turned. Parker rushed forward, not slowing down. He spun around at the last possible second, presenting his back to the lead zombie. He shoved the 2 large bags of food on his back into the face of the creature, using them like a battering ram. The ghoul's head snapped back from the impact. Parker planted his feet on the ground, legs spread wide for stability. He pushed back as hard as he could, driving with his legs. He pressed the ghoul into the others behind it, pinning the creature against the mob. Thomas darted up beside him, employing a similar strategy. He swung the bag of food on his back around to the front in a quick motion, catching it with both hands. He held it up like a shield, gripping the canvas tight. Thomas drove it into the chest of the other zombie facing them, using his momentum and weight. He pushed the creature back into the mob, forcing it against the door. Then he shifted his grip, pulled out his knife, and delivered a kill strike to it. The blade found the eye socket, sliding in deep. The 2 privates held the horde at bay, working in tandem. The forward-facing creatures were pinning the others against the door, making it difficult for them to turn around. The zombies were packed so tight they could barely move, trapped by their own numbers. Despite their efforts to contain the situation, one creature slipped out from the left side. It had been pressed against the wall, and the shifting of bodies created a gap. The zombie stumbled through, its foot catching on a corpse. It struggled for balance, but quickly regained its footing. Then it turned towards Parker, moaning. The private became worried at the sight of the ghoul closing the distance to him. He was committed to holding the line, both hands pressing against the food bag. He couldn't let go without losing control of the situation. Parker's mind raced, trying to figure out how to deal with the new threat. But he was spared having to make that choice when Foster rushed in from the street. The captain moved with speed and precision, covering the ground in seconds. With a forceful strike to the forehead with a blade, the creature crumpled to the ground in a heap. Foster didn't hesitate, immediately going to work on the zombies that were struggling to break free from their captivity against the door. The creatures were starting to realize there was fresh meat behind them, trying to turn, but they were wedged too tight. Foster took advantage, his knife rising and falling. One strike right after another to the side of their heads dropped them. The blade found temples, ears, the soft spot behind the jaw. As the captain worked his way down the line, Hansen rushed up to the other side. The sergeant mirrored Foster's actions, striking frantically at the ghouls on his side. His movements were faster, less controlled, but just as effective. One by one, the bodies fell to the ground as Parker and Thomas continued pushing against the mob. They held the creatures at bay, their arms trembling from the exertion. Sweat ran down their faces, their breathing heavy. The food bags were the only thing keeping the zombies from overwhelming them. After a tense few moments that felt like hours, Foster stepped back and delivered a killing blow to the creature being held in place by Parker. The knife entered through the crown of the skull, angled down. The zombie went limp. "We're good, Parker," Foster said. Parker's legs nearly gave out as he tried to stand up straight, the relief overwhelming. His muscles were burning, cramping from the sustained effort. Foster reached out and grabbed his arm, keeping him upright. The captain's grip was solid, steadying. They looked out to the street, spotting a couple dozen zombies shambling in their direction. The second wave was almost on them, maybe 30 yards away and closing. The men readied their blades, preparing for another fight. But before they were forced to defend themselves, they heard the sound of a lock disengaging from inside the radio station. Metal scraped against metal, bolts sliding. A few seconds later, the door opened inward, revealing Midnight Mike. Mike stood tall in the doorway, maybe 6'2". His dark hair was pulled back into a ponytail, hanging halfway down his back. His heavy metal t-shirt was wrinkled from having worn it for the better part of a week, the fabric creased and stained. But his face lit up at the sight of the soldiers, joy in his expression. "Come on, get inside," Mike urged. The soldiers didn't wait to be told twice. Everyone rushed through the door into the safety of the station, moving as one unit. Their boots clattered on the floor as they crossed the threshold. Foster was the last through, always making sure his men were secure first. He paused at the entrance, turning back to face the street. He raised the key fob up high, pointing it in the direction of their abandoned sedan, refreshing the alarm. "We might have to do that a few more times before it's all said and done," Foster said. Mike let out a chuckle as he shut the door, his shoulder pressing against the heavy metal surface. The locks engaged with solid clicks, sealing the zombies outside. The DJ turned to face Foster, extending his hand. "Captain Foster, it's a pleasure to finally meet you in person," Mike said. His handshake was firm, warm. Foster returned it with equal pressure, nodding his appreciation. "Likewise, Mike," Foster replied. Mike's smile widened, gesturing down the hallway with his free hand. The interior of the station was dim, lit by a few lamps. "Come on in and make yourselves at home." Chapter 5. Mike led the soldiers through the small radio station, his ponytail swaying as he walked. The interior was cramped but functional, with narrow hallways connecting different rooms. He pointed out things as they went, playing tour guide. "To your left, there is the couch I've been sleeping on since all this began. It's also the couch where I got hot and heavy with the morning traffic girl at the Halloween party last year," Mike said. He paused mid-step, shaking his head like he was surprised by his own words. The soldiers exchanged glances, not quite sure how to respond to that information. Not sure why I just shared that, but if you're concerned about that mental image at all, just know that she was crazy hot, and you should probably avoid sitting on the left side of the couch, Mike added. Thomas looked at the couch in question, a worn leather sectional that had seen better days. His nose wrinkled slightly as he processed what Mike had just told them. I think I'm going to stand for the rest of our visit, Thomas said. Hansen nodded in agreement, adjusting the food bag on his shoulder. The weight was starting to make his back ache, but standing seemed preferable to sitting on that particular piece of furniture. That's probably a good call, Private, Hansen said. Mike continued down the hallway, gesturing to an open doorway on the right. The room beyond had a small table, a microwave, and a counter with cabinets above it. Up here on the right is the break room. If you want to hang out in here for a minute, I'm going to step across to the booth, Mike said. Foster nodded, already lowering his food bag to the floor. The weight coming off his shoulders was a relief, the straps having dug deep grooves into his skin through his shirt. Do what you need to do, Mike. We need to give that car alarm time to do its thing, Foster said. The zombies outside would need time to disperse, to wander away from the station. Rushing out now would just get them surrounded again. Mike nodded and walked across the hall to the booth, a small room with windows looking into the break room. He shut the door behind him, muffling the sound. Then he reached for his headphones, putting them on so that he could hear what was being sent out over the airwaves. He adjusted the volume, his fingers finding the controls by muscle memory. A song was playing, something with heavy guitars and pounding drums. He let it play for a few more seconds, then faded it out early. His hand moved to the microphone, clicking it on. My apologies, rock fans. I know that's an all-time banger, and to apologize for cutting into it, I will be playing the full album here in just a second. But I wanted to let you all know that Captain Foster has officially entered the building, Mike announced. His radio voice was back, enthusiastic and energetic. He hit a button on the console, triggering a recording of a round of applause and cheering. The sound filled the booth, then faded out. He's here with a few of his friends, and arguably more importantly, food that isn't stale crackers or ramen. So I'm going to take a short break and get a proper meal into me. Enjoy the tunes, and I'll be back before you know it, Mike continued. He cut the microphone and hit the button on the CD player, starting the album from the top. The music kicked in, guitars screaming through the speakers. Mike tossed the headphones onto the desk before walking back across to the break room. The soldiers had opened up a bag of food and were setting it out on the counter like a buffet, cans and boxes and bags spread across the surface, a feast of non-perishable goods. Sweet Mother of God, that's the second most beautiful sight I've ever seen in this break room, Mike said. His eyes went wide at the spread, taking in all the options. Parker looked up from arranging some soup mixes, his eyebrow raised. I'm almost afraid to ask what the most beautiful was, Parker said. Mike's face broke into a grin, his expression suggesting fond memories. The morning traffic girl at the Christmas party, Mike said. Parker gave Mike a curious look, his head tilting slightly to one side. The DJ noticed the expression and responded with a shrug of his shoulders, completely unapologetic. What? We have a lot of parties here, and when we party, Mike explained. The soldiers let out a chuckle, the tension from their harrowing escape finally starting to ease. Mike walked over to the makeshift buffet, his eyes scanning the options. There was a selection of soup mixes in different flavors, bags of rice and beans, and stuff to make sandwiches with. Bread, peanut butter, jelly, and some canned meat. But the first thing that caught his eye was a box of pre-packaged snack cakes, the kind with cream filling and chocolate coating. You want to know what the best thing about being an adult is? Mike asked. Hansen leaned against the wall, crossing his arms over his chest. He had a feeling he knew where this was going. So far, it sounds like lusting after the morning traffic girl, Hansen said. Mike paused, considering the point. Then he held up a finger, acknowledging the correction. You want to know what the two best things about being an adult is? Mike asked. Hansen let out a laugh, shaking his head. Foster and Thomas were grinning, waiting for the punchline. Mike opened up one of the sweet treats, tearing the plastic wrapper with his teeth before continuing. When you're an adult, you can have dessert first, Mike said. He bit into the snack cake and let out a satisfied moan, his eyes closing in appreciation. The taste of processed sugar and artificial chocolate was apparently heaven after a week of crackers. Mike began talking with his mouth full, crumbs falling from his lips. Foster put his hand up, making a stop gesture. "Take your time, Mike. Take your time," Foster said. Mike nodded and continued feasting on the treat, his cheeks bulging. He chewed and swallowed, then took another bite. When he was done with the first cake, he grabbed some soup mix from the counter. He walked over to the small stove in the corner, a 2-burner electric unit. In a flash, he had a pot of water on the heat, turning the dial to high. He stood there watching it, waiting anxiously for it to boil. "I don't mind sharing if you boys are hungry," Mike offered. He glanced back at them, gesturing to the food spread. Foster waved off the offer, already pulling his own supplies from his pack. "No, Mike, this is all for you." "We got stuff in our packs," Foster said. Hansen pushed off from the wall, walking closer to the counter. He picked up one of the soup mixes, reading the label. Then he looked at the rest of the supplies, doing mental math. "And I know this looks like a lot, but you're going to need to ration it," Hansen said. His tone was serious, making sure Mike understood. This food would need to last for a while, until they could establish regular supply runs. Mike looked at the spread again, nodding in understanding. "Trust me, after the meal I'm about to gorge myself on, stuff is getting rationed. Especially those snack cakes," Mike said. "I got 5 boxes of them in one of my bags for you. Couple different varieties, too," Parker said. Mike's face lit up, genuine appreciation showing. He looked at Parker like the private had just given him gold bars. "If I hadn't weirded you out by telling you about the morning traffic girl, I would give you a hug," Mike said. Parker held up his hands, creating distance between them. His expression was friendly, but firm on the boundaries. "A polite wave from across the room will suffice, Mike," Parker said. The DJ laughed as he gave Parker a wave, his hand moving in an exaggerated arc. He paused for a moment after that, his expression shifting to something more serious. The smile faded slightly. "So, speaking of traffic," Mike started. He trailed off, not finishing the thought. The soldiers noticed the change in his tone, the sudden concern. Foster straightened up, his attention fully on Mike now. The DJ glanced down at the water, which was still several minutes away from beginning to boil. No bubbles yet, just steam starting to rise. "Come on, I got something to show you," Mike said. He led them down the hallway to a small office in the back, his boots padding on the thin carpet. Mike opened the door, revealing a cluttered workspace. A large flat-screen TV acted as a computer monitor, mounted on the wall above a desk. On screen were a dozen traffic cameras, showing various parts of the city. Each feed was labeled with a street name or intersection. Most showed empty streets with a few zombies wandering around. Mike sat down at the keyboard, his chair creaking under his weight. He typed away for a few moments to pull up a specific camera, his fingers moving quickly across the keys. The soldiers stepped over to the monitor, crowding around behind him. They stared at the screen as Mike brought up a single intersection. Only a smattering of zombies were wandering around, maybe 5 or 6 visible in the shot. "So, what are we looking at, Mike?" Foster asked. The captain's eyes scanned the feed, trying to spot what was important. The intersection looked clear enough, nothing standing out as unusual. "I forget the street names, but it's the major intersection up by Nellis," Mike said. Hansen leaned in closer, recognizing the location. He'd driven through there dozens of times, knew the area well. "It's looking pretty clear to me, so I'm not sure what the problem is," Hansen said. Mike's hand moved to the mouse, clicking through some options on screen. He pulled up a timeline at the bottom of the feed. "The problem is that it's looked like that pretty much since the first night," Mike said. He typed on the keyboard for a few seconds, pulling up a video file and playing it back. The timestamp in the corner showed it was from days ago, when this all started. "This is from the first night," Mike explained. He scrolled through the footage, speeding it up. The time counter blurred as hours compressed into seconds. The soldiers watched regular traffic moving through the intersection, along with some transport trucks leaving the base. Military vehicles moving in convoy. "I think a couple of those SUVs was us," Parker said. He got kind of excited, pointing at the screen. His finger traced one of the vehicles as it moved through the frame. Thomas gave him a curious look, not understanding the enthusiasm. "What?" "I like seeing myself on TV," Parker explained. Thomas shook his head as the footage continued to roll on. The traffic thinned out, fewer civilian vehicles visible. It was clear when the apocalypse began. Zombies came running through the intersection, their movements jerky and fast. A couple of cars narrowly avoided them, swerving at the last second. But still, nothing of note happened. No crashes, no pile-ups, just chaos beginning to spread. "What are we supposed to be seeing here, Mike?" "Because I'm seeing nothing," Hansen said. His frustration was growing, not understanding the point. Mike turned in his chair to face them, his expression serious. "Exactly. You're seeing nothing," Mike said. Hansen was confused, looking over to the DJ, waiting for clarification. Mike shook his head and turned back to the screen. He sped up the footage so that it was covering an hour in a matter of seconds. They watched the accelerated video, which was nothing more than a handful of zombies running through the intersection. No vehicles, no people, nothing else. "We know that the flight stopped way earlier than they should have, given how many people were on base. If the orders were to evacuate, shouldn't people be, evacuating?" Mike asked. The soldiers perked up at the revelation, the pieces starting to come together. Thomas stepped forward, his mind working through the implications. "If they couldn't get more planes off the ground, maybe they hunkered down on base," Thomas suggested. "Nobody has heard from anyone on base since the first night," Hansen said. Thomas wasn't ready to give up on the possibility, grasping for hope. Maybe there was a simple explanation. "Maybe they can't get to a radio," Thomas offered. Mike turned in his chair again, his expression skeptical. He spread his hands wide, gesturing broadly. "You're telling me on a base that size, with that many trained individuals, that if things are hunky-dory up there, that nobody thought to turn on a radio?" Mike asked. The soldiers looked around to one another, the reality sinking in. They nodded in agreement, knowing that something bad had most likely gone down. The silence was damning. "Well, there's only one way to find out," Foster said. His voice was steady, resolute. The captain looked at each of his men, then back at Mike. They all knew what he was saying. "And we have to go there regardless if we're going to clear this city out," Foster added. "Do you have any other angles of the base?" Hansen asked. Mike shook his head, his ponytail swaying with the motion. "This is all we have in that area," Mike said. Foster thought for a moment, then looked at Mike with a proposition forming in his mind. The captain gestured to the computer setup. "Mike, I'll make you a deal. If you go through the cameras and get us a path to base, I'll make that soup for you," Foster offered. Mike's face brightened at the prospect of hot food made by someone else. He nodded eagerly, already turning back to the keyboard. "You got a deal, Captain," Mike said. "Parker, stay with Mike. The rest of you, on me. We need to start planning for the worst-case scenario on base." Chapter 6. Foster stirred the soup, the spoon moving in slow circles through the broth. Steam rose from the pot, carrying the smell of vegetables and seasoning through the small break room. Thomas paced back and forth behind him, his boots creating a rhythmic pattern on the tile floor. Hansen sat in a chair, propping his feet up on the table. He was looking up at the ceiling, his hands clasped behind his head. "Surely things can't be that bad at the base, right?" Thomas asked. His voice carried hope, maybe too much of it. Hansen didn't take his eyes off the ceiling, his expression neutral. "Look how quickly things fell apart out here," Hansen said. Thomas stopped pacing, turning to face the sergeant. He gestured with his hands, trying to make his case. "Yeah, but that's untrained civilians. Surely soldiers could handle a simple evacuation, right?" Thomas pressed. He looked to Hansen for confirmation of his hope, some reassurance that trained military personnel would have done better, but all he received was a shrug of the shoulders in response. The gesture was non-committal, saying everything without words. Thomas felt his optimism deflate. "Damn it! So how bad could it be?" Thomas asked. Foster continued stirring, his attention seemingly focused on the soup, but his voice carried weight when he finally spoke. "When we left, they were rounding up sick people to put into hangars. Scared people that I'd bet my bottom dollar weren't being told what was happening. One angry spouse with a gun could set off a chain of bad events," Foster said. Thomas thought about it for a moment, his imagination filling in the blanks. Several horrific scenes played out in his mind. Panicked crowds, gunfire, people turning without warning, the hangars becoming death traps. He let out a defeated sigh, his shoulders slumping. "So, what do we do?" Thomas asked. Hansen dropped his feet from the table, sitting up straighter. He looked at Foster's back, waiting for an answer. The question hung in the air. "The man brings up a good point, Cap. If we get to the base and the shits hit the fan, then what?" Hansen asked. Foster didn't respond for several seconds, instead focusing on stirring the soup. His movements were methodical, careful. He pulled the spoon to his lips, giving it a quick taste. The broth hit his tongue, and he considered the flavor for a moment. Then he reached for the salt shaker, sprinkling in a dash before stirring again. "Cap, are you okay?" Hansen asked. There was concern in his voice now, wondering if Foster had heard him. The captain nodded, still focused on the soup. "Yeah, Hansen, I'm just thinking," Foster said. He tasted the soup once again, the spoon rising to his lips. This time he nodded at the result, satisfied. Foster turned the dial on the stove, putting it on to simmer. The heat dropped, and the violent bubbling calmed. "Whatever the situation is on base, we're going to need information. So our first stop is going to be Central Command," Foster said. Thomas leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "Do you think the general is going to be there, or something?" Thomas asked. Foster turned away from the stove, facing his men. He shook his head slightly. "I doubt it, but everything that was happening on base flowed through that office. So it's as good a place as any to start," Foster explained. Thomas and Hansen looked at each other and shrugged, unable to find fault with the plan. It was thin, barely a plan at all, really, but it was something, a starting point. They remained silent for several moments before Thomas spoke up again, his worry still evident. "But if the base is overrun, what are we going to do?" Thomas asked. Foster's expression hardened, determination replacing contemplation. His voice was steady when he answered. "The same thing we always do, Thomas. We deal with the problem," Foster said. Hansen stood up from his chair, stretching his back. He walked over to Thomas, clapping him on the shoulder. "And besides, look at the bright side. It's a giant base, so even if there are hundreds of zombies there, it's going to be a lot better than what we dealt with in the tunnels," Hansen said. Thomas thought about it for a moment, his mind going back to those dark passages. The tight spaces, the endless horde, the feeling of being trapped. He shuddered at the memories of fighting in the tunnels before nodding. Hansen had a point. At least on the base they'd have room to maneuver, places to fall back to. "Can't argue with that," Thomas said. Before they could continue, footsteps approached from the hallway. Parker and Mike walked into the room, their conversation cutting off as they entered. The DJ paused in the doorway, his head tilting up slightly. The smell of the soup hit his nostrils, and his eyes closed for a moment. "Oh, that smells heavenly," Mike said. Foster gestured to the table with the spoon, drops of broth falling to the floor. His expression was welcoming, pleased to see Mike's reaction. "Have a seat, I'll dish it up for you," Foster said. As Mike found a seat at a nearby table, pulling out a chair and settling into it, Thomas walked over to one of the bags. He reached in, his hand disappearing into the canvas. After a moment of searching, he pulled out a small container of rolls, the plastic crinkling. "Sorry they're not warm, but you can't have soup without bread." "At least not at my house," Thomas said. He set the container on the table in front of Mike, opening the lid. The rolls inside looked fresh enough, maybe a day old at most. Mike's face lit up at the sight. "Thanks, Thomas," Mike said. He grabbed a roll, his fingers wrapping around the soft bread. He tore off a chunk with his mouth, the bread giving way easily. Foster moved to the stove, ladling soup into a bowl. Steam rose from the liquid as he filled it, careful not to spill. He set the bowl down in front of Mike with a soft clink. The DJ put his face just above it, inhaling deeply. His eyes closed again, savoring the smell like it was the first time in his life he'd ever had soup. The simple pleasure of hot food after days of crackers was written across his features. "You know, there were moments where I wondered if I was ever getting a hot meal again," Mike said. His voice was quiet, reflective. Hansen pulled out a chair and sat across from him, resting his elbows on the table. "Did you not have faith in us, Mike?" Hansen asked. Mike looked up from the soup, meeting the sergeant's eyes. His expression was serious for once, the radio personality facade dropping away. "Believe me, Sergeant, I 100% had faith in you. But you try spending a week trapped inside a radio station alone, with everybody who calls in telling you one horrible thing after another. Even the positive stuff was horrible. A little bit of doubt creeps in, even for the best of us, Mike explained. Hansen nodded in agreement, understanding what Mike meant. Isolation did things to people, made fears grow larger than they should. Mike dove into his meal, his spoon moving quickly. He tried his best to keep his satisfied moans to a minimum, especially after oversharing about the company holiday parties. But small sounds of enjoyment still escaped between bites. "So, how are we looking up to the base?" Foster asked. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Parker straightened up, ready to deliver his report. "Not terrible, actually," Parker said. He paused mid-sentence, his eyes scanning the break room. Then he walked over to the counter and knocked on it several times with his knuckles. The sound was solid, hollow. "Pretty sure that's wood. Anyway, we should be able to get into shouting distance of the base," Parker continued. Mike swallowed his mouthful of soup, then gestured with his spoon toward the hallway. His expression carried apology. "I wish I could get you right up to the front gates, but management was cheap when it came to the traffic cameras," Mike said. Parker nodded, picking up where Mike left off. He pulled out his phone, showing a map with camera locations marked. "There is a small row of warehouses and storage buildings a few blocks away from the base," Parker explained. Mike set down his spoon, leaning back in his chair. He pointed at Parker's phone. "As best we can tell from the cameras, it's mostly deserted," Mike added. Parker swiped through a few images on his phone, showing different angles of the area. Empty streets, a few scattered zombies, but nothing like the horde they'd faced earlier. "So, I figure we can get in there, get to an elevated position and scope out the base before we just run headlong into it," Parker said. "I can live with that," Foster said. He reached into his pocket, his fingers finding the car keys. Foster grabbed them and tossed them over to Thomas in an easy arc. The private caught them one-handed, looking at his captain with a questioning expression. "Would you mind hitting the alarm again?" "Just crack the door and hit it. Should do the trick," Foster said. Thomas nodded and went off to keep the diversion going, the keys jangling in his hand as he walked toward the front entrance. Hansen looked at his watch, checking the time. The afternoon was getting late. "By the time we get up there, the sun is going to be getting pretty low, Cap," Hansen observed. Mike took another spoonful of soup, then gestured with the roll he was holding. Crumbs fell to the table. "If you boys want to crash here tonight and tackle it fresh in the morning, you're more than welcome to. There's enough jackets in the lost and found to keep you warm," Mike offered. Foster appreciated the gesture, but shook his head. His mind was already made up, already planning ahead. "We appreciate the offer, Mike, but I want to get in position and know what we're dealing with. If things are bad, having a little bit of darkness might work to our advantage," Foster explained. "I understand that completely," Mike said. Before they could continue, Thomas came back into the room. His expression was pleased, satisfied with his work. "The alarm is going again, but most of them are already over there. The entire parking lot in front of the station is clear," Thomas reported. "Then let's get ready to move," Foster said. Parker walked over to the bags of food they had brought, the supplies that would keep Mike alive for the next few weeks. He smacked his hand down on one of them, the canvas making a dull thump. "Glad you're staying here," Parker said. He was talking to the bags, addressing the food like it was a person. Thomas heard Parker's comment and let out a laugh as they walked away from the break room. The private sense of humor hadn't been dampened by the apocalypse. "Hey, Captain, before you go, let me give Magnus a call to see how they're doing on their end," Mike said. He was already pulling out his phone, scrolling through contacts. Foster turned back, nodding his approval. "That sounds good to me, Mike," Foster said. Hansen had been quiet during the exchange, but now his curiosity got the better of him. He looked at Mike with genuine interest. "Where the hell did you find them at anyway?" Hansen asked. Mike's face broke into a grin, that knowing smile returning. He looked up from his phone, enjoying the moment before answering. "I told you, my station likes to party. And the traffic girl loves her some gladiator battles," Mike said. The soldiers let out a collective groan, mixed with laughter, the sound filling the small break room. Foster shook his head, but he was smiling. Mike smirked, clearly pleased with himself. He brought the phone to his ear, making the call to the gladiators. Chapter 7. Foster drove the foursome towards the northeast of the city, getting closer to the Nellis base. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the streets. The zombie activity in the streets was moderate, maybe a dozen visible per block. But it was easy enough for them to navigate through, weaving around abandoned cars and avoiding the larger clusters. "Hang a left up here, Cap," Hansen said. He was watching his phone, tracking their position on the GPS. Foster glanced ahead, seeing the street they were on continuing straight with no obstructions visible. "The street is clear ahead. Why am I turning?" Foster asked. Hansen zoomed in on the map, checking the camera feeds Mike had flagged for them. One of the intersections ahead showed a dense pack of zombies, because the intersection to the right, a few blocks up, has a horde. "Figured it might be best to put some distance between us and them," Hansen explained. Foster nodded and made the turn, the tires squealing slightly as they took the corner. He drove a few blocks before making another turn to continue in the right direction, looping around the problem area. The soldiers remained silent, each man looking out the windows at the zombies roaming around. The creatures shambled between buildings, wandered across lawns, stood motionless in the middle of the street. The engine noise drew the attention of the ghouls, their heads turning to track the vehicle, but the soldiers were well past them before any danger arose, distance and speed keeping them safe. After a few more miles, Foster slowed down. The buildings around them had changed character, becoming more industrial. Warehouses and storage facilities lined the roads, their metal sides reflecting the afternoon light. Foster pulled into the back of an industrial building, the vehicle rolling to a stop in a small parking area. There were a few zombies around who began shambling in their direction, maybe 4 or 5. They were spread out enough that they posed no real threat. "All right, we're coming up on the warehouses. Check your ammo in case we have company, but stay as silent as you can," Foster said. His voice was low, commanding. The mood in the vehicle shifted, becoming more focused. Hansen shifted in his seat, looking at the captain. "What's our target?" Hansen asked. Foster pointed ahead through the windshield, toward a cluster of buildings in the distance. Beyond them, barely visible, were the towers and structures of Nellis Air Force Base. "One of the buildings on the far end of the complex, closest to the base. I want to have eyes on before we make our push to it," Foster explained. The men nodded as they checked their hunting shotguns, the weapons resting across their laps. Hands worked slides, ejecting shells to verify loads before chambering them again. They made sure the ammunition was topped off, counting what they had in reserve. After a few moments, everyone signaled ready. Foster hit the gas, pulling back out onto the road and continuing forward into the industrial park. After another mile, they entered the small complex proper, rolling through at a low speed, maybe 15 miles per hour, slow enough to spot threats but fast enough to escape if needed. As they went, they could see numerous zombies down every side street, the creatures emerging from between buildings. The engine noise was drawing them like a dinner bell, heads turning and bodies redirecting toward the sound. "That's going to be a problem," Parker said. His voice carried concern, watching the zombies multiply with each passing block. Thomas leaned forward from the back seat, his hand resting on his shotgun. "We have enough firepower to take them down," Thomas said. Parker shook his head, his jaw tight. He was doing math in his head, counting shells versus targets. "I'd rather not blow through my shells before getting to the base," Parker countered. "We'll be all right, Parker. We'll get to our target and get inside before they get to us," Hansen said. Parker wasn't convinced, his eyes still tracking the growing number of zombies appearing in their wake. The creatures were following now, shambling after the vehicle. "They're still going to be following us," Parker pointed out. Hansen and Foster exchanged a glance, both men nodding. The sergeant's expression acknowledged the truth. Parker was right. Getting inside wouldn't make the problem disappear. It would just delay it. Foster drove up to the next street, approaching the intersection slowly. He looked to the right and saw only a small handful of creatures down that way, maybe 3 or 4 zombies visible. To the left, he saw a small horde of them, perhaps 20 strong. The choice was obvious. He turned the wheel right, committing to that direction. The captain sped up, the engine responding with a surge of power. Then he slammed on the brakes without warning, the tires screeching. The front end smacked into 2 creatures, sending them down to the ground. The impact was solid, bodies crunching under the bumper. The zombies hit the pavement hard, limbs tangling. "Everybody out, we're hiking from here," Foster ordered. The men didn't hesitate, throwing open the doors in unison. They grabbed their gear and weapons, moving with practiced efficiency. Parker and Hansen rushed up to the fallen zombies first, covering the immediate threat. The ghouls were struggling to get back to their feet, disoriented from being hit. The soldiers put them down with well-placed knife strikes, blades finding skulls before the creatures could recover. Foster took point, stepping away from the vehicle. He looked down the street ahead, his eyes scanning the environment. A small mob of ghouls was shambling around the next corner, maybe a dozen of them. More were visible beyond, drawn by the sound of the impact. He turned his attention to the building on the left, a warehouse with metal siding. He spotted a door a few yards away, a standard entrance with a simple handle. "Hansen, get that door open," Foster said. The sergeant nodded and rushed over to the door, his boots pounding on the pavement. He grabbed the handle and gave it a pull, surprised to find it unlocked. The door swung open easily, revealing darkness inside. "We're in," Hansen called out. Parker and Thomas quickly rushed through the door, weapons raised to their shoulders. They entered in a tactical stack, each man covering a different angle. Their eyes adjusted to the dimness as they cleared the immediate entrance of the building, sweeping left and right. Foster kept an eye on the zombies coming their way, watching them close the distance. They were maybe 30 yards out now, moving steadily. He walked backward to the door, maintaining observation. As he stepped through the entrance, he reached into his pocket, fingers finding the key fob. He hit the alarm button on the SUV. The deafening noise erupted from the vehicle, the horn blaring and siren wailing. The sound bounced around the buildings, echoing off metal walls and concrete surfaces. It sent up an alarm to every zombie in the area that there was fresh meat within reach. Foster shut the door behind him, his shoulder pressing against it. He secured it with the internal lock, a simple deadbolt that slid into place. Then he turned and joined the others. Within moments, the zombies outside reached the SUV, their presence announced by moans coming through the metal exterior of the building. The sound was muffled but persistent, a constant reminder of the threat. The men stood in a semicircle just inside the entrance, shotguns pointed out into the darkness of the warehouse. Their eyes strained to see details, pupils dilating in the low light. It was a mostly vacant space, the kind of warehouse used for overflow storage. However, there were stacks of boxes and goods on the far side of the building, taking up maybe a quarter of the total space. Pallets were loaded with inventory, shrink-wrapped and labeled. As they looked through the darkness for movement, scanning for threats, an overhead light in the distance clicked on. The sound was distinct, triggered by a motion sensor. One zombie shambled into the light, its silhouette becoming clear. The creature was drawn by the noise of the door opening and closing, following the sound. As it walked through the pool of illumination, two more creatures joined the line. They shambled behind the leader, their movements uncoordinated and slow. "Cap, we got company," Hansen said. Two more overhead lights clicked on in sequence as a smattering of zombies shambled into view of the motion sensors. The system was automatic, designed to save energy by only lighting occupied areas. The moans echoed in the empty space, bouncing off high ceilings and hard surfaces. The men took note of their numbers, counting heads. More lights clicked on as the small mob shambled towards them, spreading across the width of the warehouse. The soldiers breathed a sigh of relief as the zombies' numbers topped out at 15. Manageable, easy even. "Parker, you're with me. We're taking the left flank. Hansen and Thomas, take the right. Break them up and put them down," Foster ordered. The men nodded to the captain as they branched out to their positions, splitting into two teams. They marched towards the zombies with confidence, boots echoing on the concrete floor. The lights overhead clicked on as they went, their movement triggering sensor after sensor. Slowly, the space became more illuminated, lighting the battlefield even if the fight was one-sided. Foster and Parker walked casually up to the first two zombies leading the way, their approach unhurried. Each man put their hand on a ghoul's chest, creating distance and control. Then they delivered knife strikes to the head, blades punching through bone. They tossed the bodies aside like empty soda cans, barely breaking stride as they moved up to the next creatures in line. Hansen and Thomas had a similar experience on their side of the warehouse, dispatching zombie after zombie with little trouble. The sergeant went high, targeting temples and eye sockets. Thomas preferred straight overhead strikes, using his height advantage. Zombies in these numbers, spread out like they were, posed little threat to the soldiers. The creatures couldn't coordinate, couldn't overwhelm. They were just targets. A couple of minutes after beginning their assault, the warehouse fell silent. The last zombie dropped with a wet thud. The space was clear now, save for the muffled sounds of zombies outside moaning and banging on the SUV. The alarm had drawn them like flies, keeping them occupied. The men stayed in the light for a solid minute, catching their breath. They looked around for any signs of movement, scanning shadows and checking corners. When they realized they were finally alone, that no more threats were emerging, they relaxed. Shoulders dropped, weapons lowered slightly. "Well, that got the blood flowing," Hansen said. His breathing was slightly elevated but controlled. Parker walked over to Foster, wiping his knife blade on his pants. "What's the play cap?" Parker asked. Foster reached into his pocket again, grabbing the keys. He hit the alarm button on the SUV, restarting the diversion. The vehicle chirped once before the alarm continued its resonating wail. The sound would keep the zombies focused on the wrong target, buying them time. "Let's check to see what they were stashing here while that alarm does its thing. Then we're out of here." Chapter 8. Foster and the rest of his men stood by the exit door to the warehouse, their ears pressed close to the metal surface. They were listening to the other side for signs of zombies, trying to gauge the threat level. They could hear a few feet shuffling on pavement, the distinctive drag of dead limbs, but nothing in significant numbers, no chorus of moans or sounds of a large group. "Okay, we're getting out of here and heading to the left," Foster said. He kept his voice low, barely above a whisper. The men leaned in to hear him clearly, their attention focused. "If the street is clear, we'll move up. If not, pull back and we'll try and cut through the next building," Foster added. The men nodded, understanding the plan. Simple, flexible, with a fallback option. Hansen moved to the door, his hand wrapping around the handle. He held up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. On 0, he pulled the door open in one smooth motion. Daylight streamed in, momentarily blinding after the dimness of the warehouse. Foster was the first man through, moving with speed and purpose. He darted a few yards to the right, his knife already in hand. A zombie stood with its back to him, unaware. Foster planted his blade squarely in the base of the creature's skull, the strike clean and efficient. The ghoul dropped without a sound. Parker and Thomas rushed out next, their boots hitting the pavement as they cleared the doorway. They picked nearby zombies who had just begun noticing the soldiers, the creatures turning toward the movement. Quick strikes later, and the ghouls were down for the count, crumpling where they stood. By the time Hansen emerged from the warehouse, stepping through and securing the door behind him, every zombie within range had been dispatched. Bodies littered the immediate area, maybe 6 or 7 total. The sounds of the SUV alarm on the opposite side of the building continued to blare, the noise carrying through the industrial park. It was pulling zombies towards it like a siren's song, drawing them away from the soldiers' position. Foster motioned for the men to follow, his hand gesturing across the street. They moved to the next building, using it for cover before advancing up to the street corner. As they moved, they kept their eyes trained ahead, weapons ready. No zombies were visible on the street ahead, at least not in the immediate view. As they reached the road, the captain motioned with a closed fist for his men to stay back. They froze in place, going still. Foster moved up to the corner alone, his back pressed against the building's wall. He poked his head around the corner, exposing himself for just a second. Looking back in the direction of the SUV, he saw a mob of ghouls vanishing down the street on the other side of the warehouse. They were drawn to the noise, shambling away from the soldiers' position. Maybe 30 or 40 of them, all moving in the wrong direction. To the right, it was mostly clear. Only a smattering of ghouls were spread out over the next few blocks, maybe 10 visible in total. Manageable numbers. The captain waved his men up, bringing them forward with a hand signal. "We have a window to move, knife strikes only. Let's put them down and get to cover before we lose the light," Foster said. The men nodded and followed Foster as he broke from cover, moving into the open. They stayed pressed against the building, hugging the wall. The late afternoon sunlight was creating long shadows, the sun low on the horizon. Those dark shadows helped conceal their movement, making them harder to spot from a distance. As they reached the next block, they slowed their pace. Foster raised his fist again, stopping the group. Then he reached out and gently tapped on the metal exterior of the warehouse wall with his knife handle. The sound rang out, metallic and distinct. A few nearby zombies turned their heads, drawn to the noise. Rather than risk exposure by moving into the open, the soldiers waited for the creatures to come to them. The ghouls shambled closer, entering the shadowed area. The soldiers put them down, with ease in the darkness, blades finding targets before the zombies could react or make noise. As they approached the final line of buildings, moving block by block, they could see their goal. The outer wall of the Nellis base was visible in the distance, a concrete barrier maybe 15 feet high. It sat a few hundred yards past the final row of buildings, separated by open ground. Foster pointed to a large 3-story building on the left, the tallest structure on the front line. His finger indicated it as their target. The building would give them elevation, a vantage point to observe the base before committing. The foursome continued moving up, their movements synchronized and quiet. They were getting within a block of the target when half a dozen zombies shambled out from around the next building, emerging from a blind spot. The creatures appeared suddenly, maybe 20 feet away. As the soldiers prepared to take them down, raising their knives and spreading out, a gunshot cracked through the air from their left. A zombie's head exploded in a spectacular display, brain matter and skull fragments spraying. The sound of the shot echoed off the buildings, sharp and loud. The remaining zombies turned towards the source of the gunshot, drawn by the noise. One by one, the ghouls were put down by precise headshots, each shot finding its mark. 5 more cracks, 5 more bodies dropping. "Who the hell is shooting?" Hansen asked. His voice carried surprise and concern. Foster looked back down the street towards their diversion, checking the SUV's position. He was relieved to see that no zombies were picking up on this new noise yet, the alarm still holding their attention. "Whoever they are, let's hope they're friendly." "Come on," Foster said. He led the men out from cover, committing to the advance. They darted across the street, moving as a unit. They pressed themselves up against the target building as they moved up, using the wall for concealment. The captain pulled his shotgun from his shoulder, bringing it to a ready position. He was hoping that it was a friendly taking down those zombies, but he didn't want to take chances. Not after everything they'd been through. As they moved up to the edge of the building, preparing to round the corner, a man's voice called out. Young, maybe early 20s. American accent, no panic in his tone. "I don't know who you are, but you might want to get your ass inside," the voice said. Foster glanced back to Hansen, looking for input. The sergeant gave him a nonchalant shrug in response, his expression saying it was the captain's call. Foster took a breath, then responded, "My name is Captain Foster, and I'd really appreciate it if you wouldn't shoot me when I come around the corner here," Foster called out. There was a pause, then the voice came back with surprise evident. "Captain Foster?" "From the radio?" the man asked. Hansen leaned in close to Foster, a grin on his face. He kept his voice low, but couldn't resist the comment. "Look at you, all famous and shit," Hansen said. Foster shook his head, fighting a smile. He raised his voice to respond to the unknown soldier. "Yeah, that's me. We're coming around," Foster announced. He held his shotgun up with one hand, raising it above his head so the barrel pointed at the sky. A clear sign that he wasn't a threat, that he was approaching peacefully. Hansen, however, kept his weapon at the ready, covering their approach just in case. The captain came around the corner of the building, spotting a young man standing in the doorway of their target building, maybe 50 feet away. The soldier had his weapon pointed to the ground, barrel aimed at the pavement. He was waving at them excitedly with his free hand, his face breaking into a wide smile. "We're good, Hansen," Foster said. The confirmation was all his men needed. Foster led them out from cover, the 4 of them running across the open space to the doorway. Their boots pounded on the pavement, covering the distance quickly. The young soldier stepped aside, making room for them to enter. "I'm Private Carver, and let me tell you, you're a sight for sore eyes." Come in," the soldier said. His enthusiasm was genuine, relief written across his features. The soldiers filed through the door one by one, entering the building's interior. Carver shut the door behind them as soon as Hansen cleared the threshold, his hands working the locks. He engaged the deadbolt and threw a secondary latch, securing it tightly. "I'm sorry if I gave you boys a scare, But when I heard the car alarm going off, I wanted to roll out the welcome mat for company, Carver explained. His voice carried apology, worried he'd done something wrong. Foster lowered his shotgun, slinging it back over his shoulder. "You're good, Carver." "We just weren't expecting it, that's all," Foster said. Carver's expression brightened, the worry fading. He looked at the four men, taking in their gear and weapons. Then his hospitality kicked in. "Are you guys hungry? Thirsty?" "I got supplies for days over here," Carver offered. He led the group towards a small office area just off to the right, his stride eager. He opened the door, revealing a makeshift living space inside. Cubicles had been dismantled, the fabric walls and metal frames pushed aside to make a large open area. A couch sat in the middle of the space, worn but comfortable looking. A table and chairs were positioned just off to the right of that, creating a dining area. Carver walked over to a refrigerator in the corner, an old office unit that was somehow still running. He opened it up, the interior light clicking on. He pulled out bottles of water, the plastic cold and beading with condensation. He tossed them over to the men one at a time, each soldier catching their bottle. "Drink all you want. I have plenty," Carver said. Hansen twisted the cap off his bottle, taking a long pull. The water was cold, refreshing after the heat outside. "We appreciate it, Private," Hansen said. Foster opened his own bottle, but didn't drink yet. He looked at Carver, studying the young soldier. The private couldn't be more than 22, baby-faced and lean. "So Carver, what are you doing here? Why aren't you on base?" Foster asked. The question was direct, but not accusatory. Carver clammed up a bit when asked that, his expression shifting. He took a long drink of water before answering, buying time to gather his thoughts. "I was on one of the crews that were sent out to gather goods for the stadium. We got a truck loaded up, and the sergeant in charge told me to head back to the base rather than the stadium," Carver explained. Hansen's brow furrowed, confused by the order. "Why would he do that?" Hansen asked. Carver shrugged, his hands spreading wide. The gesture showed his own confusion. "I don't know, but I was in no place to challenge it. Hell, at that point, I didn't have a clue what was going on. He told me to drive to the base, so that's what I did," Carver said. He paused for a moment, his eyes going distant. Clearly the memory was troubling. He gathered himself before continuing, his voice quieter. "When I started getting close, it was pretty clear things were getting bad. I saw 2 wrecks, people being pulled out of their cars by zombies. It wasn't pretty," Carver said. Foster nodded, his expression understanding. He'd seen the same kinds of scenes, knew exactly what Carver meant. "Believe me, Carver, we know that better than most," Foster said. Carver nodded and continued, encouraged by the captain's understanding. "When I got close to the base, I could see the front gates were closed, and nobody was around to open them up. I radioed every frequency I could think of, trying to get someone on base, but there was nothing," Carver explained. He paused again, clearly troubled by the memory. His hands gripped his water bottle tighter. "I didn't know what to do. With the way the streets were, I knew I wasn't going to make it to the stadium. So I pulled in here when I saw one of the bay doors opened," Carver finished. He pointed to a window in the office, a large pane that overlooked the warehouse floor. He and the others walked over to it, their boots quiet on the thin carpet. They looked out through the glass to see a large military transport truck parked on the warehouse floor. The vehicle was massive, easily 20 feet long. Canvas covered the cargo area, concealing whatever supplies were inside. My plan was to stay here until somebody at the base got back to me. By the time the sun came up, I realized that wasn't happening. So I've been holed up here, listening to the Midnight Mike show, cheering you boys on," Carver said. Foster looked at the young soldier, seeing the isolation in his eyes. Carver had been alone for days, trapped and uncertain. The captain's voice was gentle when he asked the next question. "Have you been up to the roof to get a look at the base?" Foster asked. Carver nodded, his expression grim. "Yeah, and it's a ghost town over there," Carver said. Hansen stepped forward, offering an alternative explanation. His tone carried hope. "Maybe everybody did get out," Hansen suggested. Carver shook his head, the motion definitive. He motioned for them to follow, heading toward a stairwell. "Come on, there's something you should see," Carver said. The 5 soldiers climbed an interior staircase, their boots echoing in the concrete shaft. They went up 2 flights to a door at the top of the building, a metal exit with a push bar. Carver opened it and stepped out onto the roof. The sun was in its last moments for the day, balanced on the horizon. But there was enough light to look onto the base, to see what Carver wanted to show them. In the distance, they could see the top of a large cargo plane sitting on the runway, a massive transport aircraft. The tail rose above the base's wall, visible from their vantage point. The engines were silent, long having run out of fuel. From their angle, they couldn't see down onto the ground, couldn't see the tarmac or what might be happening below. That's been sitting there since the first night? I have no idea what happened over there, but I think it happened too fast for them to react, Carver said. His voice carried sadness, the weight of what he was implying. Foster stared at the plane for a long beat, his jaw tight. His mind was working through scenarios, none of them good. Hansen moved up beside him, waiting. "So, what's the play cap?" Hansen asked. Foster took a breath, making the decision. His voice was steady when he answered. "We're going to take the private up on his offer for some food, let the sun fully set, and then we're going to find out exactly what happened to Nellis." The end.